Something's happened here. Something really, really bad.
Hold the darkness, you can't keep it away.
Please don't go any further.
An alcoholic painter named James speeds down the highway in his Mustang, blasting music so loud it feels like it could shatter his ears. With a cigarette hanging from his lips, he slams the gas as if he were Brian O'Connor himself, but the burning tip drops and scorches him where it hurts most, causing him to swerve and nearly get crushed by a truck before crashing into a suitcase on the side of the road like she was looking for trouble. The woman who owns the suitcase gathers her scattered belongings, and James, clearly ashamed, apologizes to her. The bus she was waiting for arrives, but just as she's about to board, her belongings spill out again. The bus leaves them behind as Mary explains she's heading to Silent Hill, while James pretends he's only driving around to waste gas. The two of them take in the distant view of the Lakeview Hotel together. Maybe because of James's charm, Mary doesn't get angry even though her suitcase is ruined. James offers her a ride, but suddenly a violent storm rolls in, and the sky turns dark. Mary mentions that this almost never happens in Silent Hill. Suddenly, James jolts awake from what feels like a nightmare. His phone rings, but he ignores it. A cafe waitress asks him to leave because he's clearly drunk, and security throws him out when he resists. After being tossed out like trash, James finally answers the call, which turns out to be his psychologist warning him about drowning in his grief. The psychologist reminds him about their appointment the next day and tells him not to miss it, as it may be the only thing keeping him grounded. When James gets home, he sees a painting of Mary that gives him a splitting headache as memories of the past resurface. On the floor, he finds a letter from Mary begging him to come back because something has happened and she needs him. Not knowing what's really going through his mind, James returns to the place where he first met Mary. Thunder crashes, forcing him back into his car like a coward. He remembers the day they stood in the rain together and eventually fell in love. But now James looks completely broken. What really happened to Mary? James steps out of the car after the thunder finally stops. He walks toward the Lakeview Hotel to search for Mary, hoping he can find her there. He moves through the forest as if it were his own backyard. James meets a woman who looks very much like Mary, and in their first encounter, she asks him to carry a heavy sack without offering anything in return. He helps her and tells her he's looking for someone. Angela replies that he won't find her because flooding has contaminated the water, and people can't survive there for long. Before James leaves, Angela tells him to come back and look for her if he doesn't find Mary. At some point, James remembers his past with Mary when it felt like the world belonged only to the two of them. But Mary once told him they could never stay together because there was a part of her James had never seen. She said it in a way that sounded suspicious, even suggesting he might be afraid of her if he ever found out the truth. James promises it won't happen. Suddenly, Mary's nose starts bleeding just as they are about to get intimate. James continues his journey until he finally reaches Silent Hill. The town is empty and silent, covered in ash, as if no life has existed there for years. Suddenly, classical music echoes in the distance, and James runs to find where it's coming from. He discovers the sound is coming from a radio with someone sitting beside it completely covered in a blanket. James tries to speak to the person, but gets no response, and then a sudden noise behind him makes him jump. The man tells him that darkness is coming and that James cannot get rid of it. James runs outside and receives a call from his psychologist at the same time. When the psychologist finds out that James is in Silent Hill searching for Mary, he orders him to return home immediately. But James gets distracted by the neon lights of a strip club glowing in the distance. At the same time, a handless creature appears in front of the man hiding inside the sewer. As he steps inside the club, James remembers his past when Mary introduced him to the people of her town. They all said that Mary's father was the one who built Silent Hill and that Mary had saved them, changing the way they lived. They believed James would earn a special place there as well. Suddenly, James hears a scream and rushes to investigate. He finds the same man lying on the floor, his skin and flesh melting like ice cream left in the sun. The radio is still on, and something begins approaching James. It's the handless creature emerging from behind him. James dodges as it sprays blood from its stomach, blood so corrosive it can melt iron. He throws a metal bar in retaliation, causing the creature to retreat, just as James prepares to finish it off. From the radio, a public health warning from the mayor urges all residents of Silent Hill to evacuate immediately. Suddenly, black roots swallow the town and handless creatures begin appearing everywhere, one of them even greeting James. He runs while avoiding the iron melting spray until he trips over a large drum he fails to see. Rats scatter from their nests as if something is hunting them. One of them is caught by a strange insect and swallowed whole. The insects pile on top of each other to form a bridge upward, terrifying James and forcing him to flee. Fortunately, they don't seem to be allied with the handless creatures. James runs into the darkness while being chased by the insects that want to devour him. He spots and squeezes through a hole in an iron fence that feels conveniently placed by the director to save both his life and the movie's runtime. James enters the woodside apartments, trapping the insects outside as they continue clawing for him. As he steps inside, James hears something on the staircase. James remembers his past with Mary again. Their relationship was deeply intimate, though it's unclear what truly happened between them. Then James enters one of the rooms and sees an old TV playing a 2017 videotape. Suddenly, a crushing headache hits him like being bitten by 10 colonies of ants at once, and he remembers people covered in blood fighting over something. In pain, James calls his psychologist, who immediately asks where he is after hearing him struggle. James says he feels Mary is somewhere nearby, but as if on cue by the director, his phone battery dies, leaving the psychologist wondering where James is now. The psychologist contacts security to trace his patient James and explains that James is not dangerous, but may be in serious trouble. James steps onto the balcony to calm himself, unaware that in the room above him, a dark shadow stands behind the glass. He climbs to the upper floor and enters the room, only to discover that the shadow is merely a statue covered in butterflies. The statue is wearing a dress Mary once wore, triggering another memory of the day James came home from shopping and found Mary's friends gathered around her in a dark room as if they were judging her. The moment they realize James has arrived, they quickly disperse as if nothing had happened, making him suspicious. When James questions her about it, Mary simply says they just stopped by and that they are like family to her. James softens, but then he notices a statue of Mary's father placed on what looks like a worship altar. Mary quickly covers it and asks James not to question it. On the altar, James sees a form from Brookhaven Hospital with Mary's name listed as a patient. Suddenly, he hears someone vomiting in the bathroom. He goes to check and finds a sick-looking man inside. The man asks why James looks healthy unlike the residents of Silent Hill. Confused, James says he's looking for someone at the hospital even though there seems to be no one left, and the town feels like a giant graveyard. The man shows his infected, pus-filled hand as proof, and suddenly James hears a baby crying. They follow the sound down a dark hallway and find a child named Laura hiding behind iron bars. James offers to help her get out, but the man urges him to leave immediately and abandon Laura. Suddenly, the radio screeches again, and something begins approaching. James is struck by another wave of pain, like 20 colonies of ants biting him at once, while Laura hides again. The man becomes furious and punches James for not listening and for awakening something, then leaves him behind. Suddenly, a towering figure wearing a pyramid-shaped helmet appears trying to capture James. He runs through the hallway while fighting through the pain until he sees something lying on the floor. The face looks like Mary's crawling toward him with only its head, but suddenly its body transforms into a grotesque spider-like creature and reattaches to the head. James runs and hides, but the monster follows, forcing him into a room where he peeks through a crack in the wall. The creature enters the room James is hiding in, followed by Pyramid Head, and fortunately they are not on the same side and begin attacking each other. The spider-like creature is brutally beaten by Pyramid Head until it stops moving, but James's frightened breathing inside the room gives away his position. Pyramid Head opens the door and finds James trembling in fear, and as their eyes lock, another wave of that 20-colony ant attack strikes them both at the same time. Sometime later, James wakes up and steps out of the room. He finds Angela lying on the floor, reminding him that she had already warned him not to come to Silent Hill and dig into its secrets. Angela tells him he has no idea what kind of hell is waiting for him there. She refuses to let James touch her and tells him to leave. James runs outside and meets Laura, who is carrying a doll. Laura is terrified because something monstrous is crawling across the ground. James notices the strange doll and asks to see it, but Laura hides it and says it was a gift from Mary. Suddenly, a noise startles Laura and she runs off. James chases her until they reach Rosewater Park. Meanwhile, a woman follows them from a distance. James continues pursuing Laura, but the place feels like a maze designed to confuse people, almost like online gambling. Laura always stays one step ahead as if she's deliberately leading him on. When James reaches a dead end in the maze, Laura suddenly vanishes without a trace as he searches for her to learn more about Mary. The woman who resembles Mary calls out to him from behind. She assumes James is not from Silent Hill and believes he might help her escape. But James says he plans to go to the hospital to look for his girlfriend. Maria asks how long his girlfriend has been hospitalized, and James admits he doesn't know because they broke up long ago. After teasing him for not knowing, Maria decides to help him search. On their way, James hears the radio static again and immediately pulls Maria into hiding because the sound seems to attract monsters nearby. Sure enough, a handless creature approaches them. It sprays its blood wildly, and a frightened James feels Maria grip his hand tightly. The creature leaves without realizing they are hiding nearby. When James looks at the building ahead, he suddenly remembers following Mary and her friends in the past. Mary had been led into a narrow alley by them. James followed and found the entrance sealed shut. He forced his way in by breaking through a side panel, but once inside, he found no one there. He then notices smoke rising from below and pushes aside a trash bin covering it. He discovers an underground sewer entrance and opens it immediately. James starts to explore it, but Maria suddenly startles him and snaps him back to reality. Sometime later, they arrive at Brookhaven Hospital. Inside, James searches for records related to Mary to find out which room she was treated in. Maria teases him again for not knowing how long his girlfriend was hospitalized before stepping outside. James finally discovers that Mary was treated in the toxicology unit and meets Maria, who is listening to a recorded medical report stating that Mary's illness was caused by exposure to an unknown substance that resulted in permanent bodily damage. Maria then tells him rumors about Silent Hill being founded by Mary's father, who was worshipped like a god even after his death. James suddenly remembers peeking into the sewer and seeing Mary being forced to drink something while her friends watched like members of a twisted cult. Blood poured from her body and was consumed by everyone present. James suffers another crushing headache and briefly manifests the ability to control black roots, terrifying Maria. She pulls him away, but the hospital suddenly appears burned and in ruins. James rushes to the toxicology room to find Mary, but when he enters, he sees dozens of nurse statues inside. One of them suddenly moves and strikes metal, awakening the others like a Monday morning alarm. They both run as zombie-like nurses chase them. James and Maria get into an elevator, but it malfunctions, forcing James to fight the creatures while waiting for it to restart. He smashes them one by one like breaking statues, but there are too many, and one slips through and stabs Maria. James shuts the elevator doors as they suddenly begin working again, striking at the creatures from inside. He checks Maria's wound, which is severe and bleeding heavily. James forces the elevator doors open and carries Maria into a treatment room. While being treated, Maria asks James to promise that if Mary is not there, they will leave together. James leaves Maria behind and encounters Laura in the hallway. He demands that Laura tell him where Mary is, but Laura accuses him of not truly looking for her and reveals that her doll is actually alive. Laura blames James for leaving Mary alone and tells him to find her before it's too late. James chases Laura as she runs toward another part of the building. In the toxicology wing, Laura slips into room 318, the room where Mary was treated. James enters, and Laura sneaks out, then locking him inside. Suddenly, a noise echoes through the room, and James moves to investigate. Without warning, the patient bed slams against the ceiling, startling him. He cautiously checks what's beneath the blanket. The creature beneath it drips blood like Mary once did, but its face is twisted, and it has 4 arms. Suddenly, one of its hands forces its way into James's mouth, lifting his body off the ground. But then he jolts awake and realizes he is the one being examined in a hospital. His psychologist arrives and tells him that Mary has been dead for a long time, and that James already knows that. He asks James to promise that he truly wants to get better. Sometime later, James drifts into another memory of when he begged Mary to leave Silent Hill with him. He confesses that he saw what happened in the sewer, where they tore into her body, but Mary becomes angry and rejects him. Mary admits that it had been happening to her since childhood, though she never understood why her father allowed it. James, furious, gives her one last chance to leave with him, but Mary realizes from the way he looks at her that he is already disgusted. In the end, James gives up and leaves her behind, and as he is about to drive away in his Mustang, he notices the townspeople watching him from a distance. The next morning, James's psychologist explains that he has been treating him for a year, yet his condition has only worsened. Mary meant everything to James, and her death shattered his grip on reality. It is revealed that James suffers from severe psychological trauma and overwhelming guilt that causes vivid hallucinations, and the psychologist insists he can help if James is willing to cooperate. Suddenly, James sees a woman who looks like Mary walking outside, triggering another episode. The sky turns red and butterflies gather behind the window glass. James returns to Maria, who urges him to leave with her because Mary will never come back. But James insists on continuing his search while Maria tempts him to give up. He walks into a corridor filled with paintings of Mary's face, which turns out to be a massive labyrinth. James realizes that Maria is not real and has only been distracting him from finding Mary. He focuses his mind to make Maria disappear, and suddenly Pyramid Head appears and kills her. And inside the helmet is another version of James himself. After Mary's death, James painted a self-portrait and drew a red pyramid over his own head. Overcome with grief, James falls into the water and awakens outside the burning Lakeview Hotel. He enters the hotel and finds Laura waiting for him. Laura asks whether he is finally ready to face them, and tells him to remember Mary's full name. James clutches his head and recalls standing at Mary's grave, where the name reads Mary Angela Laura Crane. The name feels forced together, like mismatched hardware trying to run the same system. Laura opens the path to James's memories, which resemble a burning corridor. James walks through the flames and enters a room where he meets Angela. Angela shows him a hand gripping her leg, symbolizing her inability to escape her past. James reaches out to help her, but suddenly the hand pulls him in with violent force, dragging him down with it. Inside, James sees a grotesque creature that looks like two bodies fused together on top of a bed, symbolizing Mary's lifelong trauma of lost control, domination, and helplessness since childhood. James gently touches his head and apologizes to it, causing the monster to burn to ashes. Another corridor of fire opens, and James walks through it, seeing Mary standing at the far end. He calls out to her and chases her until he reaches the burning hotel balcony. James walks along the blazing balcony and finds Mary wrapped in a blanket on top of a bed. James remembers the past again when he visited Mary as her condition had grown critically worse. Mary confesses that her father had been poisoning her since she was a child, making James feel guilty for leaving her before. Mary begs James to end her life, but he refuses. She pleads with him because she can no longer endure the pain she is suffering. In the end, James helps her by covering her mouth and suffocating her until she dies, and James breaks down in tears filled with regret. In James's fractured consciousness, Mary's bed rises into the air as the balcony floor collapses beneath it. Butterflies emerge from inside Mary's blanket and swirl around her in the air. When the blanket opens, Mary seems to transform into the butterflies themselves. The floor beneath James crumbles, yet instead of falling, he begins floating in midair. Mary reaches out her hand as if about to kiss him, just like in their past when they were surrounded by butterflies. James suddenly finds himself sitting beside Mary's body again, but there is no fire or destruction anymore. Only bright, peaceful light. He carries Mary's body into his Mustang and drives into the water, planning to end his life alongside hers. But suddenly, a truck speeds toward him and nearly crashes into him, snapping him back to reality as he swerves and hits a suitcase on the side of the road. He returns to the moment he first met Mary, as if he were stuck in a Chinese reincarnation romance drama searching for true love. However, in this film, things are different. James is still trapped inside his psychological hallucination, just in another version of it. Before he was trapped in guilt, in a silent world filled only with ruin and decay. Now, James is trapped in a bright and happy world with no monsters, no fire, and the story ends here. Hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.